here.
Hello, friends. Just a quick announcement before we jump into today's podcast episode, and that is to let you know that the Dare to Hear training, Releasing God's Heart Through Hearing His Voice, Part 1, is now live on my website, debbiekitterman.com. Click on the shop button, and it should be right there as the first item that you can add to your cart. Early bird pricing is through August 31st, so make sure to register and invite your friends to join you. And the dates are going to be Tuesday, September 20th through November 8th. That's 8 weeks of training. And you're going to need to purchase your own copy either from my website or Amazon of the Releasing God's Heart Through Hearing His Voice training manual if you haven't got that already. And I changed the time a little bit so that our West Coast friends can join us. So the time is going to be 8:30 to 10:30 Eastern time, 5:30 to 7:30 Pacific time. We're going to meet on Zoom. We're going to have a lot of fun. I'll bring some testimonies from people that joined before. And for those of you that have been waiting for the doors to open, it's time. I'll have some more information for you in the weeks to come. But now go ahead, go register. And I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, September 20th for that class. Now, enjoy this week's episode of Dare to Hear the podcast. Hello, I'm Debbie Kitterman, and welcome to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we equip you and challenge you to dare to hear the voice of God. Well, I'm excited to introduce my next guest to you, and maybe you know him. His name is Connor Boyack. He is President of Libertas University, an award-winning free market think tank that changes hearts, minds, and laws in favor of free society. A public speaker and author of 35 books, Connor is best known for the bestselling Tuttle Twins book series, a children's series introducing young readers to economic, political, and civic principles. Over 4 million copies have been sold worldwide. Connor lives near Salt Lake City with his wife and 2 homeschooled children. Connor, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was really excited when I got the email about your new book, America's History. And I was really excited. I have to say, I haven't read the Tuttle Twins because I don't have grandchildren and my kids are, late 20s. But I've heard a lot about it, and I actually am on your email list. So I get stuff about that. And so I was really excited to hear that you wrote a history book. So my first question is, what compelled you to write a history book?
Oh man, compelled is kind of a good word. I felt called to this work and I resisted a little while. There's a very simple answer. Over the years, we have millions of kids now reading the Tuttle Twins books. And so we get a lot of reader feedback, people asking for a book about this, a book about that. And there have been a lot of requests for us to dive into history. And I always kind of thought, I guess in the back of my head, there's tons of history books out there. Our books teaching about like economics and entrepreneurship, those are different. There's not anything like that, but there's like tons of history books. Why would we need to do one of those? So I said, all right, well, let me test my theory. I went on to Amazon, I went on to eBay, bought a whole bunch of history books, social studies, textbooks, all the rest. And so I spent a lot of time flipping through them, trying to understand the good, the bad. And I came away from that process realizing there was a big problem. These books really, they teach really well what I'll call the superficial history. Names, dates, who wrote a letter to who fought which battle when. They're chock full of that stuff. Where these books almost consistently failed, in my estimation, was in teaching what I'll call the substantive part of history, the ideas, the philosophies, the Judeo-Christian influence on the founding fathers, the writings of John Locke that revolutionized the colonies, these ideas that we can relate to today, apply to our own world. We can't, muskets and uniforms and, eating hardtack, Valley Forge, not having shoes. Like we can't really relate to that in our modern world, but we can relate to the ideas. And so I felt compelled, to use your word, to step in and say, we do need a history book that sure talks about what happened. That's important. But more importantly, talks about why those things happened and why it matters to us today. That's where all these other history books failed. And so we wanted to create a book that did that.
And which I think you did with America's History. And I was going to save this question for last, but it says volume 1. And so how many volumes do you have in store?
So our hope is that this book is just really well received and spreads like wildfire, which to us would be the kind of market signal of increased, interest and demand to keep going. Yeah. So assuming that that's going to happen, we have in our vision a 4-volume series. So this one ends at 1776, right as they declare independence. And then the next volume would pick up from there and go all the way through the Revolution, the fighting, the Constitution. Volume 3 could then go on from there, the Civil War, post-Reconstruction, everything else. Volume 4 could be the World Wars, the Progressive Era, into kind of the modern day. So that's a very rough kind of sketch of what we're thinking. It all hinges on how well this first book does. We may kind of, just do 5 volumes instead of 4 or 3. I don't know. That's kind of far down the path. But we knew doing this one that there's so much more story to tell in history. And so we're teeing up at least a second volume, but hopefully more beyond that.
Yeah, well, I like that because that's a step of faith. And so that's like, yep, we're going to believe that we're going to get more. So I saw that and I was like, ooh, I already like that. Because I've been out of school for over 30 years. We won't say exactly how many years out of school, but I'm like reading this and I said to my husband, like about the boats. I'm like, I didn't know these other boats came. And he goes, no, all I knew about was the Pinta, the Santa Maria. And I was like, no, those aren't even on the list. And so we were having a great conversation around our dinner table, my husband and I, and history was one of my favorite subjects in school. And so I really appreciated this. So how is your book different than, I know obviously, but for those people that are just listening to our interview today, how is your book different than what they're going to get in school, they're going to learn besides just when I was learning, it was numbers and facts and learn these things and.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you really liked history when you were younger. I was the opposite. I really did not enjoy it. I had someone interviewing me the other day and he said, what qualifies you to write a history book? I'll tell you what qualifies me. What qualifies me is I did awful at history in school. I really disliked it. I didn't understand it. I didn't like the pump and dump, right? Like pump your head full of information, take the test, and then you can dump it out of your head. Yeah. I know how history is taught wrong. That's what qualifies me to figure out how to do it right. And so, as you ask about how this would be different from schools, well, certainly one thing is what I mentioned earlier, and that is our focus on the ideas, why things happen rather than just what happened. But beyond that, one of the big differences with our book is that it's just one big story. Our book is narrative form. And, if you crack open a textbook, as I did 2.5 years ago when I was flipping through all these books, everything is just like I don't even know how to say it. It's just like sporadic and little crumbs here and moving on to the next thing. And it's all just like all these like morsels like thrown in trying to create this cohesive like timeline of events, but it's not cohesive because it's like you're just like getting this and you're getting that and then you're getting. And so our book is just one fluid, long, fun storybook. And what we found with the Tuttle Twins books, the original kind of series that we've done, that we've sold 4 million plus of, is that when you use story to teach about a complex idea, let's say inflation. One of our books is all about inflation, or another is about entrepreneurship or about personal responsibility. When you take these ideas, like that could be really boring for kids to, hey, let's read a textbook all about inflation and how money works. And kids are going to be bored to tears. Young Connor would have been bored to tears. But when it's like, sit down and let me tell you this fun adventure story, and along the way, they're getting these ideas sprinkled in, something about the human brain just totally shifts. And so this is unlike, any other book in the sense that it's story driven. We do have, as you know, in the book, there's these little like asides that, learn more about this guy, or here's a timeline, or we do throw those in just to add a little bit more meat to the story that we're running through. But fundamentally, it's a story. That's the main difference. And what that means for the moms and dads listening out there is this is the way to deliver a lot of information, sometimes complex information, to your child in a way that will have context, in a way that will be interesting, and more importantly, in a way that will help your child start to understand why it matters to them and why it matters today. That's something these other books don't have. It's just like, here's these random facts that you have to memorize for a test or a quiz. Ours is, here's a story about history. Let's talk about what it means to you. And I think that's far more meaningful for the parents out there, for what they want for their children.
Absolutely. And I appreciated, I teach, I'm a Bible teacher, so not so much. I did teach kids too. And the way that you wrote this book and the way that, there's this, it's beautifully also laid out, but there's the more about us, and then there's thoughts from you and just different things throughout it. And then let's stop and think about that. And I love the timelines. I loved how you put that in there, because I'm a visual person, and I'm also a person that is like, don't just make me read about it, but get me engaged into the story. And yes, this is a history book for children, but I learned so much from it. So I appreciated the way you laid this out. And I can see how it could be for not just homeschools, but also in school systems as well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, because this is like, the hot button topic, which is really critical race theory and the 1619 Project, right? So there may be some people that are like, well, I don't really have kids. I'm not really paying attention to that. My kids aren't in school, or I send my kids to private school. But can you kind of talk a little bit about that, how it affects how our kids learn about American history today?
Absolutely. I really like this question. The way we frame history is the way we shape our world today. Here's what I mean by that. Let me share a personal example. Okay. I was bullied in high school. I was short. I was very late bloomer, so I was picked on quite a lot. Now, I could choose to look at that, as many people would, and be a victim and bemoan the bullies and be angry and, pass that on and continue to behave in a way where I'm manifesting that anger and frustration and loathing and everything else. Alternatively, I could reframe my own history, and I could say, you know what, I'm going to choose to see that as a growth opportunity. I'm going to have compassion for my bullies and forgive them, because for all I know, they were being beaten at home by their parents, and they were, trying to process it, and they took it out on young Connor and others. I'm going to choose to be empowered by that growth opportunity. And so suddenly you can see how me having a certain narrative or frame about my own history empowers me to make different, and I would say better, choices in my present and my future. I think it's the same way with something like American history. We can choose to look at it as a bunch of white supremacist bigots who owned slaves and wanted to create the patriarchy and, screw all the, minority groups and everything else to enrich themselves. And that is the frame that is being taught by the 1619 Project, by critical race theory, and many, many teachers out there in K-12 schools who are using that frame and that narrative. This idea of white guilt and capitalism is patriarchy and evil and a big problem. And I believe this is intentional. I believe there are people out there who are advancing these ideas because they are socialist and Marxist, and they want kind of government control. They want to suppress individual freedom. And the way to do it is to divorce our present from our past and get people to attack our past so that they see their present differently today. I think that's extremely problematic. I think it's extremely problematic for the parents out there who send their kids to school, who just assume the best, assume that their kids are going to be well-rounded and taught the right things, who don't know that their kids are being exposed to these insidious ideas. These seeds are being planted in their children's minds that are very hard to uproot and replace later on. And so what we tell those parents, it's like, look, even if you don't homeschool, if you're sending your kids to public school, private school, whatever you do, the key is to be intentional. The key is to realize that there are these agendas and ideas swirling around there. And if you're not proactively teaching your children the ideas and the values that you believe in, someone else is going to. Mm-hmm. Parents are really good. I think Christian parents, I'll say as an example, are really good at transmitting their religious ideas to their kids. They'll take them to Bible study, Sunday school, youth group, etc. So I think they do really well there. Where a lot of these same parents fail is to do that when it applies to economics or civics or history and these other things. And they just assume that the kids will learn the right things in school. And then they're surprised years later, why does my kid believe that? Or where did you get that idea? So intentionality is the key. That's what we're trying to do with the Tuttle Twins, is to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, get these books, read them together as a family, have some discussion questions. You're going to start planting the right seeds that you agree with so that as your child goes out in the world and hears different ideas, at least they're not just going to absorb them as true at face value, but they can evaluate them and say, well, wait a minute, I heard differently. So what's the difference? And let me have a discussion about this, or let me have some critical thinking and evaluate this new idea and see what I really believe, rather than just adopting what they're told by authority figures in their life. That's what we're trying to do. And that's the mission of this new book.
Yeah. And I really appreciate it as I don't have grandchildren yet, but I'm hoping one day soon. And I could see myself reading this, or my kids reading it when they have kids to their kids, and then us having a discussion. I really could do that, because you break it out of more about us, more about this, more about that. And like the illustrations are beautiful. And like I said, this was a conversation that my husband and I had. Like, this is the timeline with the boats. And when they came along, and I was like, wait a second, I didn't know this. I mean, maybe I learned it in school, but it was the pump in the information and then dump the information later so that I can get the test and get the A and move on. But there was so many, it's so beautifully and so brilliantly laid out, Connor, the way that you decided to do this, and the engaging story. And really, I think it's well-rounded, because I think you talked a lot about what happened then, and really engage, so much so that I even love I was going to ask you this, but one of my favorite chapters was the one about the continental cookies, and about the different ingredients, and just the way you laid that out. It made it so that it was easy to talk about. It was a fun activity that people can engage in. They can engage in that. They're learning at the same time. And so I really appreciated that. So I'm going out of order for my questions, but as you were researching this, was there anything that surprised you for American history that you didn't know?
Oh, that's a fun question. I think there's some fun things, like, did Benjamin Franklin, and Tom Paine, when they first met, like, what was that dynamic like? And there's just aspects of people's backstories that we don't often hear. George Washington, like, almost didn't become the commander in chief. And what would the world be like today? What was the debate in the Continental Congress like when they were trying to decide on George Washington versus, Lee? The fact that George Washington had so much early involvement in the French and Indian War, efforts, and triggering, like, literally, and I'm not going to spoil it because we talk about the book, but George Washington is basically almost single-handedly responsible for triggering the events, that led to all of the wars and the development of everything that happened. And we think of him as coming on the scene as commander in chief. We don't often realize, well, wait a minute, he was a British redcoat before that. And a very well-known one with his writings of the tales of his, adventures and fights, being like the gossip rag in Great Britain about this amazing person. So imagine the mind explosion for these people when that guy that they upheld as this military hero is now the guy leading the fight against Great Britain. And well, wait a minute, how did he trigger that war to begin with? And what was he doing that was the spark that lit the whole world changing? And so George Washington has a much bigger role than we often realize that I didn't realize. So like you, like, it was fun for me to dig in and realize, like, this, because I've been reading a lot, like, over the years, my own self-education after graduating college, and because I find history now more enjoyable because I can read it with purpose and with an eye towards how does this apply to the world today and what can I learn from it? Like let me go off on that brief tangent. We often talk about this quote: "Those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it." And we've all heard this quote. I was
totally going to ask that. It's one of my questions.
All right. Well, then I'll keep us going then, because there's a reason we put it on the back of the book, and that is we talk about this all the time. We share that quote. We nod our head. Yeah. Those who don't learn from except the big problem and what we're confronting, why we did this book, is because all those other books I mentioned, they're not teaching kids to learn from the past. And so we're going through this cyclical nature in our society where we're repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And it's like, come on, can we not realize and learn from, like we went through this as a country, 3 decades ago or a century ago or what? Like, why are we doing this again? Oh, it's not socialism. We're going to get it right this time. It's not the thing that's like killed all these people and created all these problems. No. We're going to do it different. Wait a minute. Didn't they say that last time? And doesn't everyone who's trying again so again, we're not learning from the past. That's what we're trying to do here is empower parents to say, like, if we want to have a better future, if we want to save our country, if we want to restore these principles that made America great, we have to learn from the past. We have to help kids kind of flex that muscle a little bit of learning from history and applying it today. Many adults, that muscle has atrophied, as it did for me, because young Connor didn't know how to do this. So we as adults have to learn, how do we do this? And how do we read history and discuss it for today? So that overall is like really what we're trying to accomplish with this new book.
That's really good. And maybe it was about George Washington, but that's the one that you learned the most from. Which is your favorite? That was your favorite to write? What what part of the?
I'm going to say the last chapter. So the last chapter, we really wanted to strike a fine balance between this idea of how do you declare and fight for independence, but also recognize that we often fall far short of that ideal. So in the last chapter, Emily is really struggling with this idea. Well, wait a minute, our country has done some bad things. The government has harmed people. There have been minority groups whose rights have been attacked or suppressed. Wait a minute. I thought America was about freedom and I'm learning this ideal, but now I'm learning that we've often fallen far short of it. How do I handle that? How do I work through that struggle? And so we wanted to really get that part of the story right to present it, not in a self-flagellation way. In other words, America's horrible or, any of these like super negative things, but in a nuanced way to say there's a difference between it's like Christ saying, be therefore perfect. And then like, none of us are perfect. And so how do you bridge that gap? And how do you have compassion for, imperfect people and so forth? And so that to me is like the deep, meaningful chapter to say, we have to declare independence. We have to fight for freedom, but we have to recognize that we don't always attain it. We're always striving for it. It's a work in progress. And so that was a very meaningful chapter for us to work on.
Yeah. And I really appreciated that too, because it showed the struggle of here, I'm learning this new thing. Now I'm conflicted by what I'm learning, but how do I move it forward? And I really appreciated that as well. So is there a right way to learn about American history?
I like that question too. Is there a right way to learn about American history? I'm going to say no, because we're all different. We're all unique. We're all on our own journeys. There are different paths. God has called us in different directions. We need to frame history, our histories in different ways that suit us today on our, specific journey. So I don't know that there's a right way. I think there are good ways. I think there are better ways than alternatives. We've talked about some of them. I think storytelling is huge. Yeah. I think focusing on ideas is really important as opposed to just what happened. I think those are ways to learn from history better. But man, we talk about this in the book that it's like a history vine. It's like this vine that just kind of grows and spreads. And our story starts in the book, as you know, with the Silk Road and Marco Polo, like 1,000 years ago, a millennia ago. And so that's where American history for us starts, because you got to go back and understand how these events kind of spilled over into another. And so that history vine, its tentacles are just kind of spreading. I guess it's not a tentacle, it's a vine. The vines are spreading and extending and growing. So history can go in so many directions. I don't know that there's a right way. I think there perhaps are wrong ways. I think, drilling people with facts without context, I think that's a wrong way to do it. I think being unfair about history, judging history based on our understanding today, like with critical race theory and the 1619 Project, I would say that's a wrong way to look at history. We have to be more nuanced. We have to recognize that, look at Thomas, we talk about this in the book, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And so 1619 type people, they attack Thomas Jefferson. They're tearing down his statue. Horrible guy, owned slaves. And yet he himself recognized that slavery was a moral evil. Yeah. So here's a guy who was ahead of his time, right? He grew up in this culture. This is the way the world was. And yet he was further intellectually out of there saying, we got to find a way to fix this. This is wrong. And so we have to recognize, I think there are wrong ways to look at history. I wouldn't say that there's a right way, but there's certainly better ways. And I think we have to learn history in a way that best serves us on the journey we're on to make the world a better place.
I really like your response to that. Okay. What's at stake if our kids don't learn about America's history?
Well, I think it's what we've said. They're going to repeat the mistakes of the past. Historical illiteracy is the best way for an authoritarian to rule over people. Imagine this, you've got a neighbor, and he's owned his property and you've owned your property. It's been in the family for generations, but no one really knows where the property line is. The county records, it was before there was a county, he claims one thing, you claim another. It's kind of fuzzy. And this neighbor, let's say it's the great-great-grandson of the original guy, right? He's the one living there now. And he's just a filthy person. He's got trash all over the front, used tires, broken car, and it's just spilling over, and then it's spilling over what you think is your property, and it's getting further, and then he's got lawn chairs, and then stuff, crap, trash over here, and it grows and grows and grows, and you're frustrated, but you have a problem. The problem is you don't know where the line is. You don't know where to say this far and no further, and because you don't know, you are disincentivized to push back, and therefore the encroachment continues. Mm-hmm. And that's the best analogy I can come up with in talking about why it's important to understand our history. Because if we don't know what our rights are, if we don't know what our heritage is, it's very easy to be overruled, to be dominated, for our liberties to be encroached upon. And we won't understand from history, we won't know about ourselves how to check that advance, how to say this far and no further. So to me, the downside of not learning our history is that it empowers big government, it empowers authoritarians to rule over us in ways that exceed what the Constitution says, in ways that exceed their authority. And then we have a passive society of apathetic people who just go on with their life and accept this new authoritarian type rule. And that is, I think, so far disconnected from our American heritage, from what the founding fathers wanted to give us, a republic, if you can keep it. And that, how sad would it be for all of their blood and treasure and all the sacrifice that they had if we just throw it away because we just can't appreciate our history and then fight for continuing those ideas today. To me, it's like throwing away their sacrifice. At the time we're recording this, we're heading into the 4th of July, and now we'll release this a few weeks after. But every year, here we are celebrating Independence Day. Are we celebrating it, or are we memorializing it? And there's a difference there, right? Are we recognizing that this is the way things once were, or are we doing something about it today? And so I want a freer future. I want the ideals that our ancestors fought for to be in our world, in our society, in my life today. But it's not going to happen if we don't learn history, if we don't know where that line is to push back against. That is why, in my estimation, learning history is so critical, because it's the only way that we can better understand ourselves and what we should be doing in our world today.
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. And I really liked the analogy that you used, because I think that is something that even today that we deal with, property lines and boundaries and all of that stuff. And it is so important that we do understand our history. And that's why I love the quote that you put on the back: those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. Because I think that if we don't know where we came from, we don't have a leg to stand on as we defend what we think and what we believe. I think we just have to be knowledgeable about it. And America's history, that you wrote, 1215 to 1776. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful textbook. Not just that, but I learned so much from it. But I want to talk a little bit about the Tuttle Twins, because this made me, reading this made me go, okay, I don't have grandchildren yet, but I want all of the Tuttle Twin books so that I can read them to them, because this book inspired me even to have conversations with my husband around the table. And then I'm like, I want to know what my kids learned in school. Now, my kids were in a Christian school because we didn't homeschool, but I know I have a lot of homeschool parents that listen to the podcast as well. And so talk a little bit about the Tuttle Twin books and why you think they're so successful.
Yeah, our books teach what schools once did and no longer do. Mm-hmm. And look, people send their kids to Christian schools, private schools, pandemic pods, homeschool co-ops, and all the rest. And yet we're often relying on curriculum and books that are being used out there, which often, though well-meaning and great in a lot of respects, often omit really important information like entrepreneurship and how money works and the golden rule and individual rights, property rights, and justice, and all these things. And so our books talk about a lot of these ideas, big adult ideas, through fun storytelling for kids. So we've got books for toddlers, so I've got a few randomly here at my desk. So here's the ABCs of the American Revolution. And we got these, fun little board books where we talk about some of these ideas. We've got books for teenagers as well. kind of like the choose your own adventure style where they can kind of pick which path of the story they want to go down. We've got nonfiction books for teenagers, like the Guide to Logical Fallacies and the Guide to Courageous Heroes. And so in every chapter, we're talking about different stuff. So what we're trying to do is build like a content empire where no matter how old your kid is or how they like to learn, we've got something for them. So like we've got a podcast as well. We've got audiobooks. We've got a game. We have a cartoon. So we're trying to teach these ideas that make our world better through a variety of different mediums so that no matter the age of your kid or, again, how they like to learn, we've got something for you. My mission, my goal is to make sure that the ideas of freedom are accessible to the rising generation so that 10, 20, 30 years from now, as those people become entrepreneurs, elected officials, community stakeholders, and others, they deeply understand these ideas and we can have a better future. To me, this is an investment in our future to focus on the rising generation, to realize that our school system, public, private, charter, all the rest, even homeschool in some cases, has really been dumbed down. When you look at what kids were learning decades ago, like they were, we had high standards. We were teaching some really serious stuff. We've degraded quite a bit. And I want to pull us back in an elevated, educated direction. And that's what we're trying to do with the Tuttle Twins.
Yeah. And I haven't read the Tuttle Twins, but I really like what you're saying because I think it is important. And I think it's about leaving a legacy for the generations that come behind us like, even though I was in school over 30 years ago, there's still some stuff in here that I didn't know. And maybe I did, and maybe I just forgot about it, but it was presented in a way that I was like, this is great. This is cool. Okay. I like testimonies. I like, we're talking about your book, but why don't you share a little bit about what parents have said that they've learned from using your books in teaching their children? So can you share a few of those?
Oh yeah. No, I tell everyone I'm a drug addict. That's my confession. I am a drug addict, and that drug is dopamine. Every day I get emails, texts, social media posts, and everything from parents who are sharing the impact our books are having on their kids. And I wake up in the morning and I'm exercising and I'm scrolling. I'm like, I get dopamine rush every day seeing the impact our books is having. I recently got an email from a dad. He was in the grocery store walking down the aisle with his 9-year-old daughter, and they're walking down the chip aisle. And the dad's walking and he realizes his daughter's no longer next to him. He turns around. She's at the, beginning of the aisle down there. He returns to her side and he says, honey, what are you doing? Why do you stop? And she's staring at the chips. Turns to her dad and says, Dad, I get it now. I understand spontaneous order, why there's all kind, which is a free market term in one of our books. I understand why there's 18 kinds of potato chips and there's no one in charge. There's no president of potato chip production. And yet this is the abundance we have because of the free market, that we have jalapeno spice and sour cream and onion, and that just our world is amazing. And we have all these choices and options because of the free market, and it's spontaneous order, just like we read about. And so this dad is sharing with me, and he's like, my kid knows more than most congressmen do, right? Like, and just these light bulb aha moments that parents are seeing where, we had a kid who I got tagged on Twitter a few days ago, and I think the kid was like 7 or 8 years old, and they had read our book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is all about money and inflation and the Federal Reserve banks. And so they're in the car, and the 7-year-old pipes up and says, Dad, I really don't like fiat currency. And like, wait, what? What are you talking about? And the dad starts talking to the kid, and the kid's understanding that fiat currency is just this funny paper money. I have right here money from Venezuela that I just bought the other day. That's like 1 million. It's their new currency because they're hyperinflating. And so I bought some of these to give away. So it's paper money. It's funny money. It's fiat currency. The 7-year-old is understanding the problems with printing money and inflation and why things cost more today than they did 20 years ago. And here's a 7-year-old who kind of gets it, and he's being 7-year-old-ish about it and limited understanding. But the fact that parent can now talk to their kid about this real world idea that otherwise that kid and kids like him would not care about, not understand. That's what parents are telling us. That's what they're appreciating, is the depth of conversations that they're having with their children, that they're talking about the way the world works. That's the name of our podcast, The Way the World Works. And they're having conversations about how the world works. And their kids are way more than kids 10 years older than them, high school graduates. And so that's what parents appreciate, is that through storytelling and the fun illustrations and everything, we're able to deliver these very rich and adult type ideas to kids in a way where their minds are being expanded and opened far beyond what any of their peers in school are going to get. That is the consistent theme of the testimonies that we get from parents, is just I can't believe my kids understand this idea. That's amazing. And we had an amazing conversation about it. And then 2 weeks later, we were, at this event, and the speaker said something, and my kid said, well, that's not how it works. I've read the book. I know how it works. So it's just parents, as any parent would, they just love seeing their kids' mind be open and learn about the world around them. And that's, I think, the consistent theme that we get.
Yeah. And I love those testimonies. So I'm really excited about that. Okay. You said you had a podcast. And so what's the target audience for that? Is it adults? Is it kids? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So, when we did our books, we thought we were doing children's books, so I'll answer your question this way. So we started working on this, and then we realized, as you did with this book, we get parents all the time who are like, I never learned this in school. I learned so much, our whole family had and so we realized that our children's books are actually more like family books. It's a whole family learning experience, just like you and your husband and talking together about this history book. So with our podcast, we said, we want a family experience. So what we've done is, on our podcast, all of the episodes are just about 15 minutes long, and they're really intended. It's like, hey, mom's running errands with the kids, or we're going to go drop the kids off at school, or we're all together on our way to go eat at the restaurant. We just want those quick little, seed plantings, so that they're all together in the car. We can talk about a little idea, and then maybe they all talk about it that night over dinner and continue the conversation. And so we're aiming for parents and kids together, really trying to simplify a lot of ideas, and just, again, plant those seeds that maybe some topics aren't going to land, maybe they're not going to be as relevant, but a lot of them are. And they're just, all we're trying to do is just provoke those conversations. Hey, mom, hey, dad, here's a way to intrigue your kids about these ideas, so that maybe they'll ask you some questions, and that leads into an amazing discussion. Parents really don't like when, hey, son, what did you learn today? Nothing. How was your day?
Right.
Fine. We want discussion. We want engagement. We want to see curiosity. And that's what we're doing with our books, so that these kids are asking questions, and now we can engage in dialogue. And that's what the podcast is aimed to do.
I love that. I love that because you're giving parents the tools that they need, but also I love bringing them around the table or in the living room or whatever, to really dive into these concepts together so that the family can discuss it. Because I think, as you said, even in the last chapter, because you're seeing this journey, right? The family's together, the kids are learning, the neighbors involved. And then the last chapter is really Emily's wrestling with all these things that she's learned and the history and the past, and how do I reconcile that with today, with what I know and our family values. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just a great way and a great conversation for families to have together. So Connor, thank you for today. Can you let people know how they can get a copy of America's History, 1215 to 1776? How can they connect with you? How can they find your podcast? Give us all the details.
Thank you. I really appreciate being able to join you. This is a life mission for me. I feel very purpose-driven in what we're doing to help, save our country, spread these ideas. So I appreciate being able to share with your audience. Everything that we do is at TuttleTwins.com. Very easy to find the children's books, the history book. If we've been talking more about the history book, that one specifically is at TuttleTwins.com/history. But all of our resources are there on the website, our social media, all the ways to find out what we're doing, the ebooks, the podcast, the game, it's all at TuttleTwins.com. And what we really try and do, so with the history book, we just finished creating, curriculum that goes with it. So we got 200 pages of curriculum now, and an audio book. And we're really trying to empower parents, not just to say, here's a book, but here's supplemental resources to really make this more meaningful. For example, example, with our children's books, we've got the book, but then we have activity workbooks. We have parent guides, so the parents can kind of get up to speed on what we're talking about. We got the audiobooks and others. So we're really just trying to say, like, how can we support these families with beyond the books? We want to have engagement. We want to have activities, reinforce that learning. And so all those resources are all at TuttleTwins.com.
I love that. I love that. One-stop shopping. It's my favorite. Don't have to take anything. So, and the book is so beautiful. It's so beautiful inside and out. The illustrations, the story, the history points, even the little breakouts more about this person. Here's some comments from Connor. Here's some comments from, was it Joshua? And then Elijah.
Yeah, Elijah,
and is Elijah the illustrator?
He is the illustrator, and almost co-author of the book. He was really invested in helping create all these stories and really contribute a lot. So yeah, but Elijah's been the illustrator of all of our Tuttle Twins books.
Well, and I like that because it got me getting inside of your guys' head just a little bit of the comments and the things that you did and how you actually brought the history into today and talking a little bit about that and how it translated. And then the timelines. I'm a timeline person. I like to see it laid out. I'm creative. So I loved the illustrations that went with it. Like even the pie of the way it was here's how many were in this thing. And then it changed over time. And I was like, cause I'm a visual person. So it helped me learn. And I really appreciate what you said too, that you wrote in such a way that it's like, no matter how you learn, this can relate to you, right? For all of your books, right? Because we don't all learn the same. And I think that's kind of one of the errors of, teaching in school too, is that we just assume this is the only way that you're going to learn and you're going to get that. And I was always the kid that was like, well, not necessarily. Please don't just make me read the book. Let me get engaged with it. Let me get my hands in it. Let me see what's going on. And that's what I really appreciate about this. So thank you, Connor, for joining me today.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and hope that we can, spread these principles across the country. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys got to go get a copy of America's History, 1215 to 1776. I'm looking forward to volume 2. Connor, before we end today, I always like to ask my guests if they would pray us out, or if there's anything else that they felt like they needed to share before we end today's podcast episode.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. I believe I'll just kind of leave this my own testimony or thought that I believe there are dark forces in our world that want to do us and our children harm. I believe that God wants us to spread light and truth. And I believe that a lot of parents struggle because they have the desire to do that, but they feel they lack confidence in their own knowledge of how to teach their children or how to fight for freedom in their community or how to, witness to someone else the importance of these ideas. And so I see what I'm trying to do is provide tools to the parents out there to boost their own confidence, to talk to their children, to spread these ideas in their community. I think we each need to lift where we stand, right? We're in different locations, different journeys. But if we're each doing our part and trying to engage as we can, I think we make a stronger society. I think we're fulfilling what God wants us to do. And all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. And so I want more people to wake up. I want more people to engage and rise to the calling that God has in store for us and the purpose we've been created for. Not be distracted by, social media and keeping up with the Joneses and Babylon and the material world, right? But to remember why we're here, remember what life is about, remember what God really wants us to focus on, and then be anxiously engaged in that effort to really do some important things. And so I found my calling, I found my purpose. It's to help other parents, engage in this process. And I feel very privileged and blessed to do it. And I think it's the solution to making the world a better place. And so, again, I just deeply appreciate being able to share with your audience and have the platform to spread these ideas, because I want our world to be a better place. I want our future to be brighter. I want more parents to wake up and engage in this and talk to their kids. And, it's around America's dinner tables where the country can be shaped and improved. And we need more elevated discourse and engagement of ideas and critical thinking. That's how we have a better future. I'm confident we can get there. I'm an optimist. Ultimately, especially when we can empower people with the right tools, the right information. So thank you again.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Well, Connor, I just really appreciate it. Again, America's History, 1215 to 1776, Volume 1. And go check out the other stuff at TuttleTwins.com. And this one is /history, right? That they can get to that. I'll have all those links in the show notes. So again, Connor, I really appreciate, and I really appreciate too, that you really know what you're called to do and where you're called to influence. In fact, I have a podcast coming out in September about that. That is so important that we know our sphere of influence and what God has called us to do, so that we can affect change as we're walking in our calling and our gifting. And you definitely are. And I appreciate you. And I thank you for what you're doing, not just for parents, but really for future generations, of leaving a legacy that really teaches the truth of where we came from, and how do we reconcile that, and how do we move forward, and how do we stand for what our founding fathers fought for, and how do we not just celebrate it and not just memorialize it, but how do we really make an impact with it? So I appreciate that. So Connor, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we encourage you to dare to hear the voice of God. Thank you for listening today. I'm Debbie Kitterman. If you've been blessed at all in any way, we would love for you to do a couple of things. One, share this episode, because we want to get out the message of America's history and about the Tuttle Twins and about what Connor and Elijah have been doing and the resources that are available. So share. If you follow us on any platform that you can like and subscribe and leave a review, we would be honored if you would do that. But most importantly, we want to get the message out about this. And then go check out what Connor has to offer on the TuttleTwins.com and sign up for his podcast. Listen to that, because I've learned, I don't have grandkids yet, but I'm going to go sign up for that so that I can expand and get into the conversation and get into the game. So thank you for that, Connor. And I look forward to having you join me next week on another episode of Dare to Hear the podcast. Until then, God bless and goodbye.
I'm not in the thunder, I'm not in the rain, I'm not in the winds of the hurricane. Look to me, I'm drawing you near. I have called you, dare to hear. 'Cause there's peace in my presence, so do not fear. Oh, do not fear. I have called you. In the fall of the mountaintops, I'm not in the fire and consuming flame. I'm in the whisper that calls your name. 'Cause there's peace in my presence, so do not fear. Oh, do not fear. I have called you, dare to hear. He has called you, dare to hear.